What if a single stare could unravel 14 years of silence in a courtroom ruled by fear? One quiet woman dared to expose the truth buried behind hundreds of dismissed cases. Her name is Leona Mire, and this isn't fiction. It's justice, finally fighting back. Watch the story that shook a system. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more true stories that demand to be heard. Your voice matters. The air inside Fulton County Courthouse on that sticky Monday morning felt like honey thick, unmoving, waiting for something to snap. Courtroom 3 was packed, the kind of packed that makes even the silent walls strain to breathe. Low voices buzzed in the gallery like distant thunder. The accused sat trembling in a too large suit. The judge leaned back, indifferent, and pacing near the front, like a lion in his concrete kingdom, was Deputy Cole Branner. Branner wasn't just any bailiff, he was the kind who had built his reputation on order, the kind that meant silencing who he didn't like and dragging out who dared to speak too loudly. Tall, sun-beaten, his badge gleamed sharper than his grin. He wore his authority like a second skin. Most in the room had learned long ago, don't meet his eyes, don't stand too tall, and never, ever look like you don't belong. Then she walked in. No announcement, no folder, no security clearance waved at the front door. Just a woman with dark brown skin, an orange blouse too bold for the courtroom's usual parade of gray, and a gaze too steady for someone sitting in the back row. Leona Mire didn't look left or right. She sat slowly, purposefully, hands folded around the strap of her simple black crossbody bag. No makeup, no earrings, no flash. But somehow, even in her stillness, people noticed. Branner noticed. He saw her the way predators spot the one animal in the herd that doesn't flinch. He eyed her blouse like a bull seeing red, his smirk already curling before he said a word. He didn't recognize her not as a lawyer, not as a clerk, not as one of the usual faces who shrank when he barked. She didn't shrink. She didn't even move. "What is this, a church outfit at a trial?" he barked across the room, loud enough to echo. The courtroom quieted just a little. Still, Leona didn't react. Branner moved toward her slowly, as if the space between them were his to command. "You think this is casual hour?" he continued, pointing a finger like a sword. "That attitude and that outfit, you look ridiculous." The murmurs in the gallery flickered like a faulty bulb. Some looked away. Others stiffened in their seats. Everyone knew how this game went. One wrong look, one wrong word, and Branner would drag you down the aisle like a bag of laundry. But Leona didn't flinch. She didn't whisper apologies. She didn't even blink fast. She simply turned her eyes to him level, still, patient, not challenging, just knowing. And that was the problem. To Branner, power was performance. He didn't fear anger. He crushed it. He didn't fear tears. He mocked them. But what he feared most, the thing he couldn't pin down, was someone who saw straight through him and stayed calm. He snapped. "I'm talking to you," he growled. "Walking now, fast and loud. Who let you in here? You got a badge, a title. This is a court of law, not a fashion show." The judge didn't intervene. He barely looked up. The prosecutor scratched his pen and didn't blink. No one stood up. No one objected. And yet, the air thickened. Branner stood over Leona now, looming like a thundercloud, expecting her to tremble. She didn't. She tilted her head ever so slightly, and looked at him like he had just stepped into a trap that only she could see. No rage, no smugness, just a gaze that said, "I already know what you're about to do, and I'm not here to stop you. I'm here to let you destroy yourself." He grabbed her, not gently, not with a court order, not with cause, just brute muscle and entitlement. His hand clamped onto her blouse collar, and he yanked. That's when the silence in the courtroom broke not with screams, but with stillness, like something had ruptured beneath the surface. Leona didn't resist. She didn't grab his wrist. She didn't scream. She simply let the collar bunch and crease under his grip, and without breaking her gaze, reached into her bag and pulled out a phone. Not flashy, not weaponized, just one small screen. Facing him. The front-facing camera lit up, a soft glow, like the first flicker of dawn before a storm. The image reflected half of her face, and all of his. Branner froze, not because of the phone, but because suddenly he felt seen, exposed, like the very air around him had turned into a mirror, and everyone else saw it, too. A court clerk shifted. A young intern set down his pen. Even the judge looked up, this time truly looking, as if realizing he may have just witnessed the unraveling of everything he had allowed for too long. Still, Leona said nothing. Then, in a voice low, even, and laced with something colder than threat clarity, she asked, "Are you sure you're handling the right person?" Time cracked in half. Branner's fingers loosened. His face lost its sneer. His eyes darted to the gallery, to the phones now raised. To the silence that wasn't afraid anymore, but waiting. Waiting to see what came next. Because this wasn't just a scene, it was a shift. And what Branner didn't know was that the woman he'd just tried to humiliate had been watching him for months. Tracking records, collecting files, following false arrests and altered reports. Leona Mire didn't stumble into that courtroom by accident. She walked into it because the time had come. 14 years after her father was arrested for breaking up a schoolyard fight, Leona had returned, not with a banner, not with a gavel, with silence sharper than any blade and a camera lens held steady in the face of power, and, in that courtroom, for the first time in years, people didn't look away. They looked at her. The silence in the courtroom lingered long after Deputy Cole Branner loosened his grip on Leona Mire's blouse. It was a silence thick with unspoken questions. Who was this woman? Why wasn't she afraid? Why did her stillness unnerve a man who had bullied an entire legal system into submission? The truth was simple and devastating. That silence wasn't born in that courtroom. It had been carried there for 14 years. Leona had lived inside it, not hiding, not escaping, preparing to understand Leona Mire. You have to go back to a one-room classroom in Wilcox County, Alabama. The kind of place with scuffed floors, desks older than the students, and a flag that barely hung onto its last stripe. That's where her father, Terrence Mire, taught civics, not just laws and government, but dignity, accountability, justice. He believed the Constitution had to be lived to mean something, and he believed that his students, mostly black, many poor, all underestimated, deserved to know the power they were born with. In the spring of 2011, a fight broke out in the school parking lot. A white senior shoved a younger black student during lunch. Voices rose. Cell phones came out. Some kids laughed. Others circled. And then, as fists began to fly, Terrence did what any decent teacher would do. He stepped in. He pulled them apart, told everyone to back up, called the front office. It should have ended there. But instead, 2 officers showed up, neither of whom knew Terence, neither of whom asked questions. They saw one thing: a black man holding a white student by the arm. In less than 3 minutes, Terence Mire was in cuffs, accused of assault and interference with law enforcement. The charges were thin, paper thin, but this was Wilcox County, and the law didn't need weight when it had momentum. Leona was just 17. She watched her father's mugshot spread across local news like wildfire. Teacher attacks student. Classroom hero or aggressor. No one asked the students. No one checked the footage. No one listened to Terence himself. And when the court date came, the public defender didn't even bring the right case file. No appeal. No second chance. Just 6 years in state prison. Terence didn't rage. He didn't protest. He told Leona on a recorded call 2 days before his transfer, "The truth doesn't die, baby girl. It just waits for someone to carry it." She carried it, first in the weight of her silence, then as fire. He died inside a prison medical wing 18 months later. Cardiac arrest, they said. No foul play. But no autopsy was done. No lawyer filed paperwork. No camera footage from the night he collapsed was released. Just a sealed body bag and a file stamped closed. Leona didn't scream. She didn't post think pieces or call press conferences. She did something far more dangerous. She disappeared. Not literally. She finished school, moved to D.C., got quiet. Graduated magna cum laude in political science and behavioral analysis. Interned at places where most people like her didn't get to stand at the door, let alone sit at the table. She smiled in interviews. She shook hands with senators. She learned the language of systems, not to join them, but to infiltrate. By 25. Leona had entered the Department of Justice's Ethical Oversight Division, a rarely publicized unit created after the scandal of 2009 to quietly investigate judicial misconduct, prosecutorial abuse, and systemic cover-ups. Most agents came in as lawyers, former judges, military veterans. Leona came in with none of those badges. But she had something better. She had nothing left to lose. And she had been watching, learning, studying not just how injustice happens, but how it hides. She knew court transcripts could be rewritten, that malfunctioning body cameras had patterns, that docket numbers could disappear if a clerk was pressured just enough. She saw how judges like Emery Rook and officers like Cole Branner operated in the shadows between legal and unlawful. And she learned the one unspoken rule of long-term systemic abuse: it always repeats itself until someone records the pattern. But Leona wasn't interested in headlines. She didn't want to shake the system. She wanted to unwind it thread by thread until it collapsed under its own weight. That kind of work didn't happen in protests or on the 6 o'clock news. It happened in hard drives, in sealed files, in whispered calls from interns who had seen too much but couldn't afford to lose their jobs. She built a quiet network: coders, analysts, paralegals, one clerk in Louisiana, a disillusioned DA in Tennessee, a technician who saved everything the system tried to erase. Most of them never met her face to face, but they trusted her because she never asked them to act alone. She just showed them what they weren't supposed to see and let them decide. By the time she walked into that Fulton County courtroom in her orange blouse, Leona had already collected 68 sealed case files that tied Branner, Rook, and 2 other senior officials to tampered records and blocked appeals. She had uncovered 12 cases where evidence was reclassified after a conviction. and she had documented 14 separate instances where transcripts were rewritten days after the official court dates. Still, she waited. She waited until the moment Branner's hand reached for her collar. Until the eyes of that courtroom, all those people who had learned to look away, were forced to stare directly at a system no longer pretending to be just. Because Leona didn't just want proof. She wanted impact. She wanted the silence to shatter in real time. She wanted people to stop pretending they didn't know. Her silence wasn't retreat. It was a scalpel, sharp, deliberate, waiting to cut where it mattered most. In the hours after that courtroom encounter, as the video began to circulate and internal memos started to shift tone, Leona sat alone in a small motel room outside Montgomery. On the bed beside her lay two things: her father's worn leather notebook and a printed email from a judge's assistant who had just decided to talk. In her quiet way, Leona smiled. Justice didn't need a megaphone, it needed a memory. And she had the kind that didn't fade. By the time Leona Mire left that courtroom in Fulton County, the world still didn't know her name. Not the judge, not the district attorney, not even Deputy Cole Branner, whose handprint she'd worn on her blouse like a medal of quiet war. But what they did know, what rattled in their bones long after the last gavel drop, was that someone had finally looked back. Someone unafraid. And someone who knew exactly where to strike. But Leona hadn't just walked into that courtroom armed with footage and poise. She'd walked in with the invisible weight of a network, one she had built in shadows. Piece by piece, over 5 careful, sleepless years. A web of watchers, record keepers, truth carriers, not loud, not many, but enough. They called themselves nothing. No official title, no group chat. Just a series of aliases, code names, and secured folders buried in cloud servers beneath 6 levels of encryption. To the system, they didn't exist. She called them her ghosts. And they were the reason the silence didn't swallow her. After her father's death, and after joining the Department of Justice's Ethical Oversight Division, Leona spent 2 years following protocol, gathering files, filing reports, watching her findings die on cold desks under the weight of bureaucracy and politics. That's when she understood official paths were too narrow for the truth she carried. So, one night in 2019, she submitted a final report, turned in her badge, and disappeared. Not into exile, into preparation. She scrubbed her name from every internal system, wiped her credentials, bought a prepaid flip phone, leased an apartment under a dead cousin's name in Mobile. She used burner emails and cash-only transactions, learning how to vanish in plain sight. And from the depths of that deliberate obscurity, she began to find others like her people who had seen injustice and paid for noticing it. The first was Bria Onyx. Bria was a court typist in Jefferson County, 42, sharp-eyed, sharp-tongued, and tired. She had been reprimanded in 2018 for refusing to alter the transcript of a domestic violence case where the judge had omitted key testimony from the victim. "You must have misheard," they said. Bria didn't. She typed exactly what she heard, and for that, she was reassigned to inactive courtrooms. When Leona found her, Bria had been doing night shifts, transcribing arbitration records, quiet legal disputes that no one reads, no one questions. But she was still watching, still keeping copies, still listening. When Leona approached her outside a gas station in Montgomery with nothing but a printed transcript and a name only Bria would recognize, she didn't ask how Leona found her. She just nodded once and said, "About damn time." Then came Andre Pell, Andre had been a detective in Talladega until he refused to sign off on a falsified witness statement in a gang case. The department labeled him unstable, suspended him. When Leona first reached out, he ignored her, thought it was a setup. But she left a file on his porch one rainy night. Inside were photocopies of 3 cases he had once tried to reopen and had been told were lost. They weren't lost. They were buried. 3 days later, he sent her a one-line email from a new encrypted address. "You pick the fight. I'll bring the shovel." And then there was Hye Lin. Quiet. Brilliant. Untraceable. A systems engineer contracted through a third-party tech firm servicing courthouses across Alabama and Mississippi. She had access not to court files, but to court servers, backup redundancies, timestamp logs, access trails no one ever checked unless something exploded. He had noticed gaps, files re-uploaded with different metadata, login pings from offices that should have been empty at midnight. But she never reported it. Not out loud. When Leona found her through an old DOJ metadata trace, she didn't send a message. She uploaded a single encrypted photo to a shared drive, the front of her father's civics classroom. Empty, with the chalkboard still reading, "Justice is not loud, it's honest." Hye opened a voice line that same day. Together, these 4 people, Leona, Bria, Andre, and Hye, formed the quietest rebellion the Deep South had ever known. Not with guns, not with signs, with code, with memory, with files that weren't supposed to exist, and testimony that was never supposed to be heard. They created secure Dropboxes under false domain names. One was disguised as a regional gospel lyric archive, another as a birdwatching forum. They didn't share names, only initials and locations. The goal wasn't to go viral, it was to survive visibility long enough to strike where it counted. And their first strike was Branner. Not because he was the worst, but because he was predictable, loud, patterned, arrogant. The kind of man who never changed his methods because he didn't think he had to. He left footprints in every file, every transcript, and with Bria's ears, Andre's case files, and Hye's metadata logs. They mapped his entire record across 4 counties. They found 73 incidents flagged by citizens that never made it to internal review. They cross-referenced that with video gaps, suppressed testimony, and complaints reassigned due to procedural delays. They had enough to light a fire. But they weren't ready to set it yet. That's what made the Ghost Network different. They didn't want exposure, they wanted collapse. And collapse required timing, coordination, and silence so dense it suffocated the defense before the first denial could form. So they watched, tracked, waited. And when Branner grabbed Leona in that courtroom on camera, in front of witnesses, with the weight of his own voice echoing back at him, they knew it was time to pull the first thread. But that thread was only one of hundreds they'd traced. Dozens of other names had been entered into their map. Judges who ruled too quickly, clerks who erased files on holidays, prosecutors whose conviction rates rose suspiciously fast. Each marked not just by their wrongdoing, but by the systems that protected them. It wasn't personal. It was architectural. And that's why the Ghost Network worked. Because the strongest movements don't start with those in the spotlight. They start with people no one notices. The typist, the sidelined detective, the contract techie, the girl in the orange blouse who never raised her voice but remembered everything. The system never saw them coming. Because the system never looks down. Courtroom 3 in Fulton County felt different that morning. It wasn't just the humidity or the buzzing overhead lights. It was something in the air, like the room itself sensed that silence was about to become dangerous. Deputy Cole Branner stood in his usual spot, pacing like a restless predator, bark-voiced and bloated with power. His badge gleamed, and his boots struck the tile with rhythmic dominance. To him, this day was like any other, another hearing, another defendant to intimidate, another gallery to monitor with suspicion and contempt. But this time, Leona Mire was there. She wasn't standing. She wasn't testifying. She wasn't even pretending to play the part of a lawyer or official. She was sitting in the back row, second from the left, her orange blouse sharp against the dull palette of beige walls and dark suits. Her hands rested neatly on her lap. No phone out, no clipboard, just her and the quiet, steady pressure of her gaze. Branner didn't recognize her at first, not fully. Maybe her face lingered faintly in his mind from that earlier encounter. But arrogance is the enemy of memory. He assumed, like always, that if someone wasn't yelling, they were irrelevant, until she looked at him, just once. No smirk, no challenge, just a calm, surgical glance that sliced right through him and stopped his breath. He stiffened. Something about that look made his skin itch, made him feel like his name had been spoken in a room he couldn't hear. He scanned her outfit, her posture, her silence. Something was off. Why was she here again? Why? No, he didn't like not knowing. Branner straightened his shoulders and stepped forward, pretending to check the gallery, but his path was deliberate, his voice sharp as broken glass. "Miss, you again," he snapped, fake surprise wrapped in sarcasm. "You're really making a habit of this." Leona didn't flinch, didn't blink. Her eyes held his, not in confrontation, but in containment, like she was watching something unravel at the molecular level. "You dressin' for a church choir or a courtroom?" He barked louder now, aware of the eyes turning toward him. "Because this ain't Sunday service." The judge glanced up, uninterested. The stenographer tapped her keys with no urgency. This was just another Branner moment, a routine burst of hostility no one wanted to interrupt. The room had seen this before, too many times, but this time was different. This time. Branner walked up to her row. Close, too close. "I asked you a question," he growled, his voice lowering as his temper climbed. "What's your purpose here?" Leona didn't answer. Her stillness was the answer. It burned him. In front of dozens of people. In a space he controlled. He felt powerless. Not because she was loud, but because she wasn't. Not because she fought back, but because she didn't need to. Her stillness was louder than any outburst. So he did what men like Branner always do when they feel control slipping. He grabbed. His hand shot out. Fist tightening around the fabric of her blouse creased it. Bunched it in his grip, like he was shaking the rebellion out of her bones. "You think this is a game?" he hissed, eyes wide. "You think I won't drag you out again?" And that's when it happened. Leona moved, not fast, not defensively, but with precise calculation. Her right hand slid slowly into the crossbody bag at her side and pulled out a small, ordinary phone. No flash, no warning. She tapped once, flipped the camera outward, and tilted it gently until the front lens captured everything: her calm, his rage, and the room that no longer wanted to look away. A blinking red light appeared on the screen. Recording. Branner froze mid-grip, his fingers still clutching her collar. his breath coming faster. The courtroom didn't erupt. It didn't gasp. It froze like the room had been knocked off its axis. He saw himself in the reflection of her phone, saw the face of a man used to taking, snarling, ordering now caught in digital glass. Unfiltered, undeniable. And Leona. She didn't speak. She didn't threaten. She just looked at him. Still, balanced, like a mirror held to a monster who had never truly seen himself before. The fear hit him before the anger did. He let go. The crumpled fabric unwrinkled slowly as it slid back down over her chest. Her blouse, like her, returned to stillness. "Ma'am, put that away," he said, but his voice cracked. The command lacked its usual blade. It sounded like a question. She didn't. He took one step back, then another. His boots no longer pounded, they shuffled. The courtroom was silent. Yes, but not indifferent. The silence had changed. It wasn't fear anymore. It was witness. It was weight. People were watching with purpose now, not just survival. A woman in the second row took out her phone. A man near the exit cleared his throat loudly, like daring someone to object. Even the judge leaned forward not to issue control, but to understand what had just shifted. Leona turned her camera off. One tap. That's all. Then she placed it in her bag with the same calm she entered with, folded her hands again, and looked forward. No press conference, no outburst. She didn't need to make a statement. He did. He had made every statement she needed through his fear, his grip, his voice breaking in front of people who were no longer pretending this was normal. He exposed himself, not because she forced him to, but because he didn't know how to handle someone who didn't fear him. And that was the genius of it. Leona didn't come to fight. She came to reveal. And when Stillness stared back at a man who relied on noise, on chaos, on obedience born from fear, he crumbled. Because you can't overpower what won't resist you. You can't threaten what has already seen the worst and chose to stand still anyway. Later that day, news would quietly leak to internal offices a video recording, anonymous, showing Deputy Branner gripping a woman in court, yelling without justification. It would trickle to oversight boards, local reporters, and finally into the inbox of the Department of Justice, where someone, somewhere, would recognize the woman in the orange blouse. But in that moment, in that room, the only thing that mattered was this Stillness won. And fear for once belonged to the man with the badge. The video of Deputy Cole Branner's outburst in Courtroom 3 did not go viral. It was never supposed to. The footage, silent, sharp, and undeniable, passed like a ghost through encrypted drives, quiet inboxes, and locked rooms where decisions are made in whispers. But its impact was anything but quiet. Within 72 hours, Branner was placed on administrative review. 3 of his past misconduct complaints were reopened, and for the first time in over a decade. Internal eyes turned toward the courthouse with more than passive curiosity. But Leona Mire wasn't finished. In fact, the Branner incident was only a curtain pull, a small fire meant to illuminate a larger machine. And that machine had a name. Judge Emery Rook. To the public. Rook was a legacy man, gray hair, polished glasses, Southern decorum, appointed during the Bush era, re-elected under 2 governors. He was the kind of judge who drew headlines for efficiency, not controversy. His docket moved fast. His decisions were clean, and his nickname across Alabama legal circles was whispered with a strange mix of respect and fear, the finisher. Because once Rook ruled, it was over. Appeals crumbled. Objections disappeared. Civil rights cases, especially those tied to excessive force, wrongful arrest, or racial profiling, vanished like smoke through a vent. Attorneys stopped filing them altogether in his courtroom. You don't walk into Rook's house unless you've already written your loss speech. One public defender joked bitterly. It wasn't just anecdotal. Over 14 years, Judge Rook had dismissed 89% of civil rights cases on what he called procedural technicalities, improper filings, questionable standing, statute of limitations gray zones. The law, he claimed, was a scalpel, not a sledgehammer. But Leona saw through the gloss. Because when she began cross-referencing Branner's old reports with Rook's rulings, something eerie emerged. They matched, word for word, case after case. Branner's version of events regardless of contradictions. Missing evidence. Or community backlash was parroted directly into Rook's final rulings. It wasn't just deference. It was duplication, the language, phrasing, even typos, copied. And once Leona saw the pattern, the rest of the machine began to take shape. Working with Hye Lin, the Ghost Network's systems engineer, Leona gained backdoor access to the courthouse archive servers. These were the redundancies hard drives not scrubbed by public IT systems, meant only for system restoration. That's where the real data lived: deleted logs, timestamp histories, metadata trails. What they found was damning. In at least 32 cases, surveillance footage from courthouse hallways and holding cells had been logged, deleted, and replaced with files of identical length but different hash signatures. The videos had been altered, some trimmed by only seconds, others overlaid with generic security timestamps that didn't match the day's digital logins. One entire footage block 15 minutes long was replaced with a blank gray screen labeled Camera Outage 7C. But there were no outages reported that day. Even worse were the audio memos, internal recordings used by judges to document thoughts before rulings. Rook's memos were sealed by court order, marked as confidential deliberations. But he retrieved 3 from the backup logs. In one, Rook mutters, "Branner's filed a clean report. No need to stretch this. Dismiss with prejudice, get it off the books." In another, referencing a black teen's false arrest, he says, "No appetite to stir community tension over a juvenile with priors. Close it quietly." There was no mention of facts, no legal analysis, just decisions made before proceedings began. Leona's hands trembled not from fear, but from the sheer scale of what they'd uncovered. It wasn't that justice had failed in Rook's courtroom. It had been reprogrammed, rewritten like bad code, designed to reject input that didn't match a predetermined outcome. She dug deeper. In case transcripts, she noticed small edits made after final rulings. Witness statements were rephrased. Objections appeared that were never spoken aloud. In one case, a public defender's entire closing argument was cut in the official record, replaced with a line that read, "Argument presented, no new information." That public defender, when contacted, broke down in tears. "I always thought I was losing my mind," she said. "I knew I said more. I remember saying more. But the record didn't match. I couldn't prove it. Now, she could." Rook's machine was elegant in its cruelty, not brute force, but precision denial. It didn't shout down the truth. It edited it, made it inconvenient, legally invisible. And every part of it depended on people not looking closely. But Leona had been looking for years, with Bria Onyx's transcripts, Andre Pell's buried cases, and Hiei's digital forensics. Leona created a master timeline, a living map of Rook's courtroom from 2011 to present day. It included victims' names, altered rulings, overwritten logs, deleted footage, and every case tied to Branner's original incident reports. She called it the Rook Ledger. Then she sent it to one person, a retired appellate judge named Ellis Monroe, who had once tried to challenge Rook's dismissal rates and been silenced. The reply came quickly. Just 3 words. It's time. And suddenly, what had been quiet became momentum. An internal review board launched a closed inquiry. 2 former clerks came forward, anonymously at first, then a junior prosecutor, then a jail nurse, each with pieces of a machine that had operated in plain sight for over a decade. Rook didn't respond to the leaks. His office issued no statements, but behind locked doors, meetings were held, emergency files were pulled, backup servers were wiped. Too late. Leona had copied everything. The power of Judge Emery Rook wasn't just in his rulings, it was in the illusion that his decisions were final because they were flawless, untouchable. But when you crack the casing, when you peel back the performance, you find something all machines fear most. A mirror. Rook had ruled over thousands, had ended lives with a pen stroke, but now, the system he designed to protect itself was turning inward because someone had dared to watch. Not protest, not scream, just watch. Carefully, patiently, and when the moment came, shine a quiet, merciless light on every place the truth had been sealed. Sometimes, an empire collapses not with a bang, but with a whisper, one tiny crack that splinters the facade. After dismantling the illusion of Judge Emery Rook's infallibility and revealing how justice had been reprogrammed from the inside out, Leona Mire wasn't looking for headlines. She was looking for truths too small to forget. And she found one. It was hidden inside frame 982. The discovery came late one night, 4 floors underground in a decommissioned records vault used to store old court surveillance backups. The Ghost Network had flagged a file, a 2017 holding cell video labeled Recovered Segment, Incomplete Sync. To anyone else, it was corrupt footage, less than a minute long, stored in an outdated format. But Leona knew better. Hiei Lin had isolated a metadata tag that made her stop cold. The tag read, Incident DM, no footage logged. DM Devon Marr. Leona had seen the name before. It was buried in a Branner report from 8 years prior. A minor altercation with a juvenile male. Case closed without charges. No internal inquiry. No complaint filed. Because Devon was just 14. Poor, black. No guardian present. And by the time anyone knew what happened, he had been processed, fined, and forgotten. Until now. Leona loaded the video. 47 seconds. That's all. At first silence. A grainy image of a holding cell. The kind of cold, beige space where time stands still. Devon sat in the corner's small frame, oversized hoodie, face half lit under a flickering ceiling bulb. His hands rested in his lap, knees pulled up, eyes red but dry. Then Branner walked in. No clipboard, no escort, just swagger and shadow. He barked something off-screen, inaudible. Clipped. Devon flinched, stood slowly, confused. He mumbled something, maybe a question, and then it happened. Branner stepped forward. quick and hard, and slapped Davon across the face. Not a push, not a warning, a slap. The sound cracked through the speakers like a gunshot. Davon staggered back, one hand to his cheek, breath stolen from his body. Branner leaned in close. The audio spiked as he muttered low. Furious camera off. Then the screen went gray. Leona sat in the dark, the air around her turning heavier with every second that passed. She didn't cry. She didn't curse. She simply rewound the footage. Again and again. Until the still frame Davon's face, caught in the milliseconds after impact, was burned into her vision. A moment frozen between disbelief and pain. A boy who learned in under 1 second that silence could hit harder than fists. Frame 982. That was the exact frame where everything changed, where truth stopped being hidden and became evidence. Leona didn't wait. She encrypted the file, anonymized her IP through 6 layers of proxy, and leaked the footage through a private whistleblower server. She didn't sign her name. She didn't watermark it. She let it travel on its own weight. And travel it did. By sunrise. The clip had been uploaded to 3 social justice forums. By noon, it had 40,000 shares. By evening, it was on national news. But no one talked about it like a video. They talked about it like a moment. People didn't say, "Did you see the clip of the kid?" They said, "Did you see frame 982? The phrase exploded across headlines and hashtags. Hashtag frame 982. It became a chant in rallies. A mural in Southside Birmingham painted Davon's frozen silhouette with camera off scrawled across the background in blood-red paint. Branner's name was trending for the first time in his career, and not for his authority. But Davon Mire. He had disappeared. Leona searched, scanned public records, hospital forms, even local church bulletins. Finally, she found a rental history tied to a shelter's address in Huntsville. She drove there alone, under cover of dusk. No agents, no allies, just her. The footage, and a heart full of names too long ignored. Davon was 22 now, skin thinner, eyes older, voice softer than it should have been. He didn't remember all the details, just the pain, the humiliation, the way no one believed him when he tried to tell his probation officer what Branner had done. He had learned early that pushing back made things worse. But now he had watched that frame too. He knew the world finally saw him. Leona didn't ask him to testify. She didn't want to parade him. She just handed him a USB and said, "This is yours. No one edits it this time." He didn't speak. He hugged her. And that was enough. In the weeks that followed, frame 982 became more than a clip. It became a mirror, held up to a system that had gone unchecked for far too long. Parents showed it to their children. Lawyers showed it to juries. Judges who once dismissed civil rights claims with a shrug began requesting full body cam logs before motions were even filed. Internal Affairs opened 11 new investigations across 3 counties. Deputy Branner resigned, citing personal safety concerns. Judge Emery Rook issued a 1-sentence statement that reeked of distance. "I have no comment on ongoing internal reviews." But the public had comments. Thousands of them. And at the center of it all, uncredited, unseen, was a woman who never raised her voice, never sought a spotlight. Just one frame. Just one moment. Leona had always believed in the quiet power of truth. But now, the world believed it too. Because when systems fail for so long, it only takes a sliver of reality 47 seconds. One unedited truth to cut through generations of silence. Sometimes justice doesn't need a verdict. It needs witnesses. And sometimes it begins with just one unaltered second. The world had already seen Frame 982. It had shaken screens, lit up protests, and cracked the first layer of silence surrounding the Alabama judicial system. But Leona Mire wasn't finished. Because behind that single slap, those 47 seconds of undeniable brutality, wasn't just one corrupt deputy or one complicit judge. It was a machine. And now, she had the recording that would reveal the hands turning its gears. The public hearing was held in the largest chamber in Montgomery. Cameras were allowed. Press seats filled within 10 minutes. Folding chairs were dragged in for overflow. People stood shoulder to shoulder in the back, waiting not for another speech, not for another apology, but for something that couldn't be twisted, redacted, or spun. Leona sat near the center. No podium, no legal team, just her. A black flash drive in a plain envelope, and a folder marked Sealed Exhibit A. Across the room sat two men who had once shaped the lives of thousands with nothing more than ink. Deputy Cole Branner, now pale, stripped of his badge and dressed in civilian gray, and Judge Emery Rook, wearing his robe like a shroud. He hadn't resigned yet, but his legacy was bleeding out. The room buzzed until the gavel struck. Then silence fell. Not the respectful kind. The charged kind. The kind that builds when truth is too close to be denied. The committee chair leaned forward. Ms. Mire, we are prepared to receive your evidence. She stood slowly. No emotion, no drama. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't have to. She said one line. I'd like to enter into record the contents of this file, Rook Branner, March 2nd, 2018, private line recording, source backup server Epsilon. She handed the drive to the tech. The screen lit up. Audio began. It was grainy, but clear enough. A male voice, Branner spoke first. Clipped and casual, like he was ordering lunch. Kid's mom filed again. She's getting loud. Then came Rook, unmistakable in his dry, commanding tone. How bad she wants her son's file unsealed. He's talking to a podcaster. Jesus Christ. A long pause. A sigh. Then scrub the arrest. Bury it under juvenile relocation. I'll cite inconsistency in testimony. You flag the report as resolved. Another pause. Then something colder. We don't need a new martyr. Cole, we need quiet. Finish it. And then, like a signature in blood, Branner's response, as always, Judge. You call it, I clean it. The room didn't erupt. It breathed in, collectively, painfully. And then all hell broke loose. Lawyers gasped. Reporters scrambled to tweet. Someone shouted, "That's conspiracy." A junior clerk in the back dropped her notebook and ran out, face white. Across the aisle, Branner didn't speak. His lips trembled. His eyes dropped to the floor. Judge Rook. He stood slowly, mechanically like a puppet whose strings had just been cut. He turned to the panel, and, for a moment, Leona thought he might speak, but instead, he pulled the black robe from his shoulders, folded it neatly, and set it on the table. Then he walked out. No words, no defense, resignation. Mid-session. It was over. But the shockwave didn't stop there. As media rushed to confirm the recording's authenticity, a deeper thread emerged, one even Leona hadn't expected to surface so quickly. A Freedom of Information Act request filed by a D.C. journalist unearthed a paper trail buried inside the Alabama Department of State Legal Affairs, a funding program called Judicial Stability Initiative. On the surface, it looked like community outreach grants for court technology upgrades, docket management, public education. But when cross-referenced with Bria Onyx's timeline and He Lin's recovered audit logs, a disturbing pattern formed. The funding had been funneled almost exclusively to courthouses that had seen spikes in clean case closures, cases dismissed unusually fast, with minimal documentation. And at the center of every approval form was one name: State Legal Chief Patrick Greaves. He had signed off on every dollar, met privately with Rook 5 times between 2014 and 2020. 2 of those meetings happened days after explosive civil rights cases were mysteriously withdrawn from the docket. Now the dots were connected. Branner didn't just act alone. Rook didn't just rule alone. They were the hands, but Greaves had been the architect when pressed for comment. Greaves issued a bland 2-line statement. All funding decisions were made in compliance with departmental protocol. I deny any knowledge of wrongdoing. It didn't matter. The court of public opinion had already ruled. By the end of that week, Branner's law enforcement certification was permanently revoked. Rook's resignation became official, along with a quiet forfeiture of his pension. Greaves was placed on indefinite administrative leave pending federal review. But perhaps the most powerful shift wasn't in policy or headlines. It was in the people. A local pastor printed the words, "You call it, I clean it," on T-shirts as a chilling reminder of what silence once enabled. College students turned the Rook Branner tape into a podcast episode called The Sound of Power. It hit 1 million plays in 4 days. And in a small courthouse in Greene County, a civil rights case that had been dead for 6 years was quietly reopened. Leona didn't attend the celebration. She didn't speak at the rally. She sat alone that night, watching the hearing replay on a muted screen. The sound wasn't necessary. She knew every word by heart. Because this wasn't about glory. This was about exposure. Because the only thing the powerful fear more than rebellion is truth they can't control. A slap on a boy, a buried video, a voice memo not meant to survive. These were never random. They were connected. And now the world knew it. After Judge Emery Rook walked out of the courtroom mid-session, after Branner's badge was stripped, and Greaves buried himself behind a no comment. The world wanted a hero. Reporters called it a modern legal miracle. Podcasts hailed her as the ghost behind the gavel. Networks fought for the exclusive interview. Leona Mire was the name on everyone's lips for a moment. But when the flashbulbs came hunting, Leona wasn't there. She didn't attend the hearings that followed. She didn't step up to accept the quiet DOJ commendation that landed in her inbox. She declined every panel invite, ignored the calls from New York book agents, and let a full-page newspaper spread go to press with her picture. And no quote. Instead, she disappeared again, not into silence this time, but into service. It began with a storefront, small, sun-bleached brick, tucked between a pawn shop and a shuttered barber shop on the outskirts of Birmingham, near where her father once taught. No fanfare, no ribbon cutting, just a hand-painted wooden sign bolted to the inside of the glass. We hear you. No name, no logo, no hours, just that phrase, and a bell above the door. The place was barely 600 square feet. 1 folding table, 2 second-hand desks, a used copy machine that jammed every 3rd scan. But it wasn't about technology. It was about presence. And it didn't take long for the whispers to begin. Someone's helping folks reopen old cases. You know that girl from the courthouse? She's working out by Ellison Street. You bring your papers. They listen. For real. Within a week. Bria Onyx had driven in from Montgomery. She brought 3 boxes of old transcripts she'd saved during her court typist days, files that were never meant to leave the building. She stayed. 2 days later, Andre Pell arrived in a pickup with 2 busted taillights and the last remaining copy of a use of force complaint he'd filed before losing his badge. He dropped the file on the desk and said, "I've got time now." He stayed. 2. Hie Lin came last, not in person, but digitally. She built the intake encryption system, masked the network, and secured the center's server with 6 layers of digital camouflage. She programmed the intake form herself, a simple question: what wasn't heard, with a 500-word box beneath it. They didn't advertise. Didn't have to. People found them. A woman whose landlord was a judge's brother. A teenager with an erased juvenile record until the sentence still showed up when applying for jobs. A retired nurse who'd testified in a civil negligence case, then watched her words vanish from the transcript. People who had spoken before and been ignored. Now they were being heard not by courts, not by press, but by each other. Leona greeted every single one of them. She never sat behind a desk. She sat across from people. At eye level. No robe, no badge, no legalese, just a legal pad, a pen, and the question her father used to write on the chalkboard at the start of every lesson: what is fair and why isn't it? On the wall behind her desk hung one framed item, not a diploma, not a certification, just a still image of frame 982, Davon Marr's frozen face. The moment before history changed. It reminded them all 1 second was all it took to turn silence into action. Word spread. Quietly. Carefully. People began mailing documents in manila envelopes with no return addresses. Former defendants called from burner phones. Even a few lawyers visited, late at night, with case files tucked under coats, and guilt in their eyes. They weren't trying to burn down the system. They were trying to replace what had already collapsed under its own weight. One petition at a time. One affidavit. One redacted name re-added to a motion. One desk at a time. Within 3 months, the team had reopened 21 cases previously discarded as lacking sufficient merit. 4 had already been granted hearings. 2 had resulted in quiet settlements, and 1, an appeal for a man imprisoned after refusing to confess to a crime he didn't commit, was now on the state Supreme Court's emergency docket. Still, Leona refused credit. She told reporters who camped outside to go home. "This is not my story anymore," she said through the mail slot one morning. "It's theirs. I just lit the hallway. Inside. The walls filled with thank you notes, not typed emails, handwritten cards, folded napkins, children's drawings with thank you for listening in block letters. One was signed only from the girl you saved before I vanished. The center didn't just hear stories. It remembered them. Because Leona knew better than anyone when a court ignores your voice. It erases more than your case. It erases you. So she built a place that couldn't forget. A place without judges, without chambers, without the need to beg for fairness. Just one open door, one phrase on the glass, and a promise whispered over and over by people who once believed their silence was permanent. I told them, and they heard me. The courthouse looked the same. The limestone facade, the arched windows, the steps that had carried too many into rooms where they were never truly heard. But on this morning, quiet and overcast, something was different. There were no protest signs, no cameras flashing in frenzy, no angry chants or sound bites, just people, families, neighbors, elders in Sunday suits, teens in denim jackets with frame 982 stitched across the back, and sitting among them, in the very front row of the gallery, was Leona Mire. She wasn't at the witness stand. She wasn't at the attorney's table. She wasn't leading this hearing because that was never the goal. She was watching, waiting, just like she had when she first sat in silence and let Deputy Branner reveal his fear to the world. But this time, she wasn't the one they were watching. This time, 12 others were about to speak. It had taken nearly 2 years to get to this point. 12 petitions, 12 stories once erased, discarded, or rewritten by the very people entrusted to preserve them. Names filed under no merit, no evidence, procedurally closed, victims of altered transcripts, vanished footage, legal loopholes designed to choke out justice in the quietest ways. But now, on this morning, their stories were coming back into the light. The docket called them reopened proceedings, but to the people seated in the courtroom, it was resurrection. Case 1. A factory worker, falsely accused of theft in a town where the manager's brother served on the bench. Her defense motion was never submitted. Today, she spoke of 2 years lost behind bars and the job she never got back. Case 4. A veteran with PTSD tased during a traffic stop, then charged with resisting arrest. The dashcam had been damaged in transfer, until Hye Lin found the original clip buried in an unindexed backup server. Case 7. A deaf teenager whose interpreter mistranslated a full portion of testimony. The court ruled the verdict stood. Today, she signed every word herself. The room stood still, listening with their eyes. 12 names, 12 voices, each one a ripple, pushing back against the silence that had once buried them. And then came the final moment. The chairwoman of the hearing committee cleared her throat. "Before we recess," she said, "we've received a written statement. Miss Leona Mire, do you wish to read it aloud?" Leona didn't stand right away. She looked to her left, where Bria Onyx sat, eyes full of quiet pride, to her right. Andre Pell held a worn copy of his own case file, no longer redacted, on the bench behind them. Davon Marr leaned forward, his hands clasped tight. He wasn't 14 anymore, but this was still for him. She stood, walked to the center of the room. No podium, no notes, just a folded paper in her palm, and a voice trained by years of speaking only when it mattered. "I didn't fight," she began, "to bring down a system." Her words didn't rise, they didn't tremble, but they landed heavy like bricks being set into something permanent. "I fought to lift the people it stepped on, so they could stand and speak without trembling." She paused, turned, looking toward the 12 seated behind her. Their faces were lined with pain, yes, but also with something brighter. Return. The return of their names to a record that had once erased them. "This hearing," Leona said, "isn't justice. It's memory, restored." Then she folded the paper, stepped back, sat down. There was no applause, no spontaneous standing ovation, just silence. But this time, the silence was different. It wasn't fear. It wasn't dismissal. It was respect. And for the first time, in a long time, It was earned. The judge called recess. The crowd slowly rose. Some hugged. Some cried. Some stood in place, not ready to let go of the weight they'd carried for so long. No one reached for a microphone. No one chased Leona down the steps for a quote, because the story had already been told in every reopened file, in every re-entered name, in every voice that no longer had to raise itself just to be acknowledged. That evening, the courthouse lights dimmed, and outside, on the sidewalk near the east entrance, someone laid a small wooden plaque beside the stone. It didn't have Leona's name. It didn't list a date or a donor. It just said, "Here." Voices returned, and we finally listened. Back at the center on Ellison Street, the "We Hear You" sign swayed gently in the evening breeze. A new stack of envelopes waited on the intake desk. More stories, more names, more truths the old system had refused to carry. Bria flipped the sign to closed. Andre brewed coffee. Hie Lin pinged in with an alert from a new client. Leona stepped out the back door and looked up. The sky was clear. No spotlight followed her. And that was perfect. Because some victories don't arrive on stages. They don't come with parades. They come quietly. In courtrooms once filled with silence, now echoing with names that will never be erased again. If Leona Mire's journey has taught us anything, it's this: justice does not whisper, it waits. And when it's finally heard, it doesn't come from grand speeches or polished institutions. It comes from ordinary people who refuse to look away. From a 47-second clip that no one was supposed to see. From a frame 982 that shattered years of silence. From 12 names once discarded, now written back into history. These were not courtroom victories delivered from on high. They were won one desk at a time. In a storefront with no nameplate. With a single message etched into the window. We hear you. For every American citizen. The lesson is clear. Systems don't fail by accident. They fail by design. And they stay broken when we convince ourselves there's nothing we can do. But Leona didn't have power. She had patience. She didn't have a spotlight. She had truth. And truth, when carried long enough, bends even the coldest courtroom doors. If one woman, 3 allies, and an invisible network could uncover 32 altered cases, expose 89% of civil rights dismissals, and reopen 12 forgotten lives, imagine what we could do together. This is not a call to rebellion. It's a call to watch closer, speak firmer, and never, ever forget. So if this story stirred something in you, don't let it end here. Click subscribe to this channel. Hit like to lift these voices. Share this video so the story of Devon Mar, of the Ghost Network, of the courtroom that finally listened, doesn't vanish like the cases once did. Because maybe you won't be the next Leona Mire, but maybe you'll be the person who hears someone else, who saves 1 second of truth, who tells a child you matter, and we are still watching. It takes only 1 second, like frame 982, to start change. And that second could be now.